In Pokrovsk, Ukrainian soldiers are engaged in fierce battles with the Russians. Syrsky stated that the armed forces of Ukraine have Plan B and Plan C for all possible scenarios. At the same time, global media report that Russia is approaching the capture of the city and the occupiers are already infiltrating Myrnohrad. Ukrainian soldiers explained what is happening on this section of the front and what key mistakes have been made. This is TSN.ua News. I'm Alina Torishin. Subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and now let's get to the main news. The situation in Pokrovsk is under control. The enemy has broken through in only a few places. The armed forces of Ukraine have a Plan B and a Plan C for all possible scenarios. This was stated by the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, in a phone conversation with TSN.ua host Ala Mazur. Pokrovsk is a continuous fortified area, the Commander-in-Chief said. Yes, there are a few places where the Russians have managed to get through the engineering barriers, but the command knows where these places are, and that's why the situation is under control, Syrsky assured. According to the Commander-in-Chief, the intensity of attacks has decreased recently. But this does not mean at all that the Russians have lost interest in Pokrovsk. On the contrary, they have gathered 50,000 fighters near the city. But there is another side to these numbers. Since October alone, Ukrainian soldiers have eliminated about 30,000 occupiers. And even despite their losses, the enemy continues to throw new units into battle. Syrsky himself says that he also spends almost all his time near Pokrovsk. He says the situation is assessed 3 times a day, and the logistical routes have already been restored and redirected. The weather has contributed to this, and at the moment, he says, there are all the forces and means necessary to firmly state that there is no reason for panic. In an exclusive interview with The Guardian, President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that in recent days, Russian forces have captured most of the eastern city of Pokrovsk after a prolonged and bloody campaign. According to him, Moscow has concentrated about 170,000 troops in this direction, turning the battle for the city into one of the fiercest in the Donetsk region, which is Putin's main objective. The president noted that despite the enemy's enormous efforts, it is impossible to speak of any real success by the Russian army, since Russia has lost many people there. According to him, in October alone, Russia suffered a record loss of about 25,000 wounded soldiers. According to RBC Ukraine, units associated with the Ukrainian Defense Forces carried out a rotation of personnel and evacuated the wounded in Myrnohrad. According to Major Andriy Kovalov, spokesperson for the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the units holding the position received the necessary weapons and ammunition the day before. In addition, a rotation of personnel and evacuation of the wounded from the front line were organized. A similar system of supply and rotation is in place for Ukrainian units in Pokrovsk. At the same time, the situation in Myrnohrad remains extremely difficult. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War report that Russian forces are gradually cutting off all major logistical routes, which Ukrainian units use to maintain supplies. Analysts citing intelligence write that the defenders' supply is now practically paralyzed. The enemy controls or shells every road that could be used to deliver ammunition or evacuate the wounded. Even infantry movement has become dangerous due to the constant threat from drones, mines, and infiltrating sabotage groups. At the same time, the occupiers are strengthening their positions, installing barbed wire. They are building fortifications and dugouts, and Russian groups on motorcycles have already been spotted in the northern part of the city. A Ukrainian soldier with the call sign Chnu said that as of November 9th, the situation in the Pokrovsk-Myrnohrad direction is entering a phase of maximum tension. Everything is developing rapidly, and with each passing day, it becomes more difficult.
The enemy is not just holding their positions, they are trying to dig into the urban area, especially in the high-rise district, where firefights are ongoing almost without pause. Some of their assault groups are trying to approach from the flanks, bypassing the apartment blocks in order to gain a foothold in the industrial zone to the east. Clearly, they are preparing for further battles for the plant itself.
Additionally, increased activity is being observed in the area of the settlement of Rivne, where the enemy is trying to secure a position to the south of the settlement by entering the private sector. At the same time, the occupiers are ramping up pressure on the northern flank of Pokrovsk. There only a small combat area remains. A small section where Ukrainian defenders are still holding the line despite continuous fire and attempts to outflank them. The serviceman notes that enemy aviation is actively operating in the Myrnohrad area. The Heights bridgehead has already been struck by FAB 3000 aerial bombs. The occupiers are trying to destroy Ukrainian fortifications and clear a path for further assault. This indicates preparations for heavy street fighting. On the eastern flank of the city, the gray zone has expanded. Small enemy groups have advanced there, as confirmed by visual observation. In the northern direction, the enemy has also managed to gain a foothold in several residential buildings. Overall, the actions of the Russian troops are marked by clear sequence and systematic approach. They are looking for weak spots in the defense, gradually capturing individual blocks, actively using aviation and drones, tightening the city in a vice. The fighting is moving into a phase of close-quarters engagements. Stanislav Bonyatov, a serviceman from Aidar with the call sign Osman, writes that in Pokrovsk, Ukrainian fighters are engaged in fierce battles with the Russians, and under current conditions, the losses are quite significant for every unit carrying out missions there. Mostly due to enemy UAVs, it cannot be said that the defense relies solely on drones. It is held together by the lives and deaths of our soldiers. If Pokrovsk falls, it will be just one of the few gains for Russia afterwards. But the story of this battle could become an important lesson for Ukraine. The commander of the Wolves Battalion, Davinchev Serhiy Filimonov, spoke in an interview with NV Radio about the key mistakes made in the Pokrovsk direction. Filimonov explains that the main problem was the chaotic arrangement of positions. Instead of first establishing a full-fledged battle formation with a system of fire and observation, only individual defensive points were often restored. Because of this, the front was forced to retreat, and the enemy gained room to maneuver. According to the battalion commander Lovkiv Da Vinci, if the defensive lines had been properly established, the line of defense could have run in the area of Salidiv. Today, the enemy is advancing through weak spots. There aren't enough infantry in the spaces between positions, observation density is low, and there's a lack of covering fire. According to Filimonov, the situation is also worsened by unreliable reports. The positions formally exist, but without UAV, artillery, and FPV drone support, they don't function. As a result, Ukrainian command is often forced to redeploy experienced assault units to eliminate breakthroughs, which only provides a temporary effect. When these forces become exhausted, the enemy advances further without resistance, consolidating their positions in the city. Flimon emphasizes that false reports from brigades are sometimes perceived as the actual state of affairs, even though the real situation at the front is often completely different. Because of this, it becomes impossible to hold positions directly in front of the city, especially for aviation and artillery, if the enemy is already inside. Filimonov emphasizes that it is necessary to change the defensive line, be able to acknowledge defeats and correct mistakes. In his assessment, at least a minimal defensive line should have been established inside the city. If there aren't enough forces for this, then defensive positions need to be built outside the city in prepared fortified areas. And most importantly, these actions must be carried out urgently. Russia is approaching the capture of Pokrovsk, but is paying a huge price. But the cost of this success for the occupiers is colossal. This is reported by CNN. Russian units have broken through parts of the Ukrainian defenses and advanced deeper into the city. Adoni does note, however, that Pokrovsk now has almost no strategic significance as the main transport routes have been destroyed. But for Moscow, it is also a political symbol. He currently estimates the likelihood that Ukraine will be able to retain Pokrovsk at about 50-50. At the same time, the situation is complicated by the Russians' main advantage. Their numerical superiority allows them to infiltrate the city in small groups and establish themselves in specific areas, creating a kind of islands of control. This is noted in an analysis for Sky News by military expert Michael Clark. He emphasizes that this tactic gives the enemy the opportunity to gradually expand their zone of influence, even without a large-scale breakthrough of the front. Clark said that Bakhmut was never supposed to have strategic significance for Moscow, despite the fact that its forces fought for the city for over a year, since it was difficult to launch further assaults from the surrounding area. He added that it was rather of symbolic importance. The difference with Pokrovsk, he explains, is that it is a road and rail hub, which makes it a truly strategic target for both sides. It would also make it easier for Russia to capture key cities, namely Slovyansk and Kramatorsk. If they take these two northern fortress cities, they will hold the Donbass, which is ultimately what they want to achieve, Clark said. Meanwhile, Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Counteraction and Information at the National Security and Defense Council, reported that Russia is trying to compensate for heavy losses in the battles for Pokrovsk and other directions through covert mobilization. This involves several parallel processes: the mass transfer of conscripts to contract service and the recruitment of reservists under the pretext of guarding important facilities. Such measures have been announced in many regions of the Russian Federation and indicate that the flow of new contract soldiers has significantly decreased and the recruitment of foreigners is no longer able to compensate for losses at the front. And what do you think? How will events develop further? Share your thoughts below this video. And stay with TSN so you don't miss the most important updates. And I'll see you in the next episodes. Thank you for watching.